Hi, Remy. It's Margie. Could you please test your audio and video if you wouldn't mind, Remy?
Hi, Margie.
Excellent. We see you. We hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for making time for this.
Yeah, yes.
Can you hear
Glad
me?
to. Yes, Randy, I can.
Okay, I'm good.
Excellent. Fabulous. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 2:30 on the 20th, and welcome to our conversation about transmission considerations for the PNM Integrated Resource Plan. This is Margie Tatro. I'm joined with my colleagues Kathy Boyce and Deborah Shields from GridWorks, and we're fortunate to be able to spend some time talking about transmission issues. As we know, that's important to the IRP, and we weren't able to get into too much detail on this at the workshop last week, so thank you for being here. The recording and the materials will be posted on the GridWorks website. The slide materials that PNM will be talking about have not yet been loaded, but we will do that shortly after today. Our primary objective of this particular workshop, this conversation, is to respond to some stakeholders' transmission-related questions that were previously submitted to the team, to us and to PNM, and thought it would be good to be able to respond to those questions. We're very appreciative of Interwest and others providing some transmission questions. And the focus really for today is to be able to answer those questions and get as much progress as we can on defining any stakeholder requested modeling runs that deal with transmission issues. Those requests are due by the end of this week, and so we'd really like to make sure questions get asked and you all stakeholders have enough knowledge to fill out any model request forms for transmission related issues. So after this introduction, we'll turn it over to PNM to give some background, and much of their background, I think, will also address many of the questions that have been previously submitted. At 3:15, we'll talk about any next steps that we need to take as a group or as stakeholders may want to lead the development of model run requests. We'll talk about next steps in that and adjourn by 3:30. So with that, let me stop sharing and turn the microphone and the video over to the PNM team, Tom, Dwayne, and whoever you have. I don't know if you're presenting first, but we'll turn it over to you at this point. If you'd like to share your screen, we'll get going with your materials.
All right, and are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, Tom, but it's got a lot of other stuff around it. If you can go to slideshow mode. Perfect. Fabulous. Thank you.
Okay. So welcome to this transmission workshop. This is information that's going to add to the workshop last Wednesday on April 15th and tries to put some perspective on factoring in the transmission costs in the analysis. Same disclaimer that we had on Wednesday that talked about the nature of the IRP information and that it should be used as largely informational and shouldn't be used for forward-looking statements. Not getting a delay on changing. There we go. All right, so for this meeting, we wanted to cover a couple of things. I'd mentioned briefly on Wednesday that we had looked at basically where we felt we were at on different transmission costs that should be included in the nodal runs and affect how the candidate portfolios turn out. So we briefly touched on that Wednesday, but we go through that in a little more detail here just to make sure people can understand that. The main implication is that we've run everything so far without transmission cost adders being considered with resources, but in the end, we have to do that for certain technologies, depending upon location. And then we go over some, really the nodal transmission sensitivity stuff we've looked at. And the primary focus of the nodal in this IRP is really just to make sure we're not creating conflicts in terms of transmission congestion, particularly in the form of curtailments, with PNM's resource portfolio or other resources in New Mexico. And that's almost really the main focus of just doing nodal in this analysis. We provide some other information, but it's largely informational and would require a lot more work to really turn it into something useful. So at the April last Wednesday's meeting, we basically pointed out that the current zonal results and the candidate portfolios that were presented have not considered resource location. So those results should be viewed as location neutral at the moment. Most of the selected resources that were presented on Wednesday do not require transmission because they're solutions like EE and DR or could be located to have minimal transmission expense. Many of the remaining resources were things like solar short duration storage that have potentially a lot of options for interconnection without driving new transmission expense or minimal transmission expense. So the exceptions we noted was that pumped hydro storage was selected in the high economic growth future, and we would certainly expect a resource like that to be located remotely from PNM's load center and need to be delivered over the transmission system. But we also want to put perspective on that because in this IRP, we will probably consider pump storage to be located up in the Four Corners area, which is the only location where we have seen feasible projects or developers even working on projects in New Mexico. There may potentially be other locations, but for this IRP, we're going to assume that's probably the most likely location. It's not likely you would find it near the load center in Albuquerque. Since storage largely utilizes transmission when renewables are not generating, we feel you can accommodate a certain amount of that without really having to add additional transfer capability to the transmission system. And then the other one that comes out in the last part of the 20-year planning period was small modular reactors were selected in a fair amount. And again, we do not expect that kind of technology to be located near the load centers. So we would expect that those cases will be rerun with a transmission adder, and we've done that and present some of the impacts of doing so here.
It's a slow advance. I'm not seeing it advance either.
Okay. So the transmission cost adders, just to make for clarity, they're fairly simplistic. We are trying to tie locations to projects that have been studied in PNM's 20-year plan, if it makes sense to do so. So for both the nuclear and the pumped hydro storage that we looked at, we assumed a Four Corners location. In our 20-year plan, we had identified an additional Four Corners to Albuquerque 345 kV line. That had a cost of $448 million in the 20-year plan, and we used a capacity addition of that line of 700 megawatts. So basically, just dividing those two numbers together, you come up with a transmission cost adder of $640,000 per megawatt. So the adder is then used to increase the capital cost of candidate resources that would require the transmission capacity. And that effectively, you take the resource capacity times the transmission cost adder, and that becomes the amount you would add to the capacity cost of that resource addition. So for an example here, let's assume we had 100 megawatt pump storage selected. The location is up at Four Corners. We would end up adding basically the 100 times the 640,000 per megawatt, or it would be a $64 million adder to that pump storage project's capital cost. So before I go into what adding that transmission adder does to those candidate resources, just going back and revisiting from last week what the total installed capacity, new capacity being added in the current trends and policy future, as well as the high economic growth future. These were kind of the capacity numbers that were developed and shown last Wednesday when we looked at what the candidate portfolios were picking for these two futures, and there are no sensitivities on these results here. If we go in and look at what in the CTP case, when we put in a transmission cost adder on the nuclear, because we're assuming at the Four Corners location, and even the pumped hydro storage, basically this shows how that portfolio was altered. And the net effect is it reduced the total. There was no pumped hydro storage selected in the CTP case, so that had no bearing on this one, but it does show that it did reduce the nuclear addition by about 15% over what was in the CTP case. And you'll see that there is less nuclear, but that then gets replaced with additional, basically linear generation, which is a gas technology, additional short-term storage, and then additional solar to basically make up the difference. So that kind of shows, if you look at the totals at the bottom line, that while it reduces the nuclear capacity if it has to incur a cost adder for transmission, other areas that are local, much more likely to be at the load center, would then compensate for that. And then just looking at the high economic growth case with the cost adders, that one does add pumped hydro storage in the 2034 timeframe. And effectively, when you put a cost adder on that, it eliminated the pumped hydro storage as the economic solution and largely replaced that with the iron air long duration storage that was modeled as a candidate resource. And then again, you'll see in the HEG case, there was significantly more nuclear selected. And as you can see again, that the cost adder reduces the nuclear and replaces that with additional gas, short duration storage, and largely solar for the energy resource. Those basically are the effect of the cost adders. There's some other scenarios that we would want to consider. You can see in here that these trade-offs actually resulted in some of the solar being replaced by more wind generation, mainly because the wind fits better with a longer duration storage than the solar does. And we would probably go back in this particular case and then also put a cost adder on the wind, because the amount of total wind being added in the HEG case is now above what we would expect the available transmission capacity to be. So effectively, the cost adders change the timing and size of resource types in the capacity portfolio optimization. That was seen in the previous slides, and the trade-off in the optimization is making to minimize cost of the portfolio. In both cases, adding transmission adders increase the total build out of the portfolio. So if there's questions on that, we'd be glad to go over them. In the end, we're effectively looking at transmission very similarly as we have in the past, where resources expected to be located remotely would have a transmission cost adder, unless you've identified that they basically are dispatched using existing transmission capacity, which would in many cases be the situation with storage facilities. Well, Margie, I'll let you see if people have questions at this point. And I think this is really the core transmission information that will affect some of the outcome of the IRP.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I see Remy's got his hand up, and our intent, Remy, was to go to you first since you had submitted a number of questions regarding transmission. So please, Remy from Interwest, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for that overview, Tom. I just wanted to make sure I understood some of the basics at the beginning. It makes a lot of sense that if you add transmission cost adders, it's going to change the selection of resources in the zones where the adders are applied.
So Remy, your audio is very choppy.
Is that any better?
Lots better.
And yep,
Sorry about that. Put the headphones on and they didn't work. Tom, thanks. I just wanted to ask a few basic questions. So did I understand right at the beginning that the model results shared so far did not, like aside from the ones you just shared in this meeting, the general initial results shared did not incorporate any transmission cost adders, but it was essentially a copper plate model?
yes, they did not incorporate any transmission cost adders. And a lot of that's because we have historically seen multiple locations for most of the technologies selected, offered with things like short duration storage, solar, and of course EE and DR don't drive a transmission transfer capability need. So that was largely what was selected in the portfolios presented, and why we don't really feel adding transmission cost adders is going to change that. And the two exceptions were the pump storage and the nuclear, which, because they would be located remotely, we need to consider the adders there.
Sure, absolutely. I guess I thought that I had understood in the 2023 IRP that the zonal capacity expansion model included transmission cost adders for multiple zones, meaning the model was sort of weighing selection of resources that could be located in multiple zones between zones, assuming, I think the result would be that it would select those resources, of course, in the zones of the lowest transmission costs. Did I misunderstand that, or has something changed in this IRP, or is it that I just misunderstood the 2023 model setup?
No, you're totally correct. But like you said, if you put transmission adders for the same technology but have differences because of the adders, it's always going to pick the zones with the least transmission adder in it.
And we were also trying to be a little bit more explicit about it rather than it being implicit in the analysis.
Okay.
Yeah,
good.
so effectively, when I went through the example with Four Corners here, that's really assigning a transmission adder to resources in that Four Corners San Juan zones.
Yeah, but in this case, just to make sure I understood, the transmission adders were really selectively applied to the specific resource type that you assumed would need them, in this case, nuclear and the pumped hydro.
Correct.
Okay. And just to sort of within that framework, why not wind? You sort of mentioned needing to go back and add to wind. I assume wind is sort of the other remote resource that's transmission constrained, or are there others?
The wind was not being selected in any significant degree, or we would have gone back and added those transmission adders to it as well. There's probably a little bit of capacity that we can get into the system from the starting point in the IRP, maybe 200 or 300 megawatts of wind that could be accommodated without transmission expansion. But because we're beyond that now, in particular the case where we put the adders on the nuclear, we would probably want to go back and look at putting transmission on that incremental wind that was the result of that. Otherwise, the amount of wind being added was only about 100 megawatts in total.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. One other question on this piece, and I have other questions we could get into, but I just lost what it was actually. Sorry. If anybody else has questions, go ahead and I'll remember what mine was on that piece. Oh yeah, sorry. I just remembered. Sorry to be jumping around. I think it's really important that the evaluation of transmission costs also look at any benefits that transmission provides. And I think the sort of big one we would expect to see in a normal IRP model, I think, is production cost savings to the extent that the sort of dispatch optimization, dispatches resources differently in the production cost model. Do I understand correctly that the analysis you just shared looking at the sort of CTP and HEG futures with the transmission costs assigned to nuclear and pumped hydro did not capture any potential production cost differences for those portfolios? Would those, like, due to transmission constraints being different? Because you're still using a zonal model for the production cost analysis, right?
Yes, it still uses the zonal model. And
And
I
so did
wouldn't,
that, apologies, I didn't mean to interrupt.
yeah, we didn't show the production cost directly on those two sensitivities we ran. That's something we can look into and provide, because it should have shown the cost adders are going to increase the total net present value of revenue requirements. But the transmission line could potentially have also allowed some additional market purchases in this case.
Mhm. Yeah, I mention it because I think it's just important that, to the extent that we're assigning transmission costs, sort of adding those into the model, that, if the model is then, the capacity expansion model is selecting resources that acquire those costs, we then should assume that transmission is in service for the purposes of a production cost simulation. Am I thinking through that the right way? And so I think that would mean that the transfer limits are adjusted in the zonal production cost model to account for the transmission having been selected via the transmission cost adders assigned to resources in the capacity expansion model. And there may also be market assumptions that change, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and we did go through an exercise looking at the 4 transmission sensitivities that we had mentioned, and one of them was that line we added between Four Corners and Albuquerque. We have that in the next section. I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on it because the zonal model really doesn't have a very good representation of the total use of the transmission system or the area surrounding it. It's very primitive from that perspective. But I can show you it touches on exactly what you're getting to in this next section here.
Fantastic, thank you.
And so, Tom Duane, before you go on, I think Tom Conroy also has his hand up. Let's take Tom's question, and then Tom Duane, I don't know how much more material you have, but let's take one question and have you continue. Go ahead, Tom Conroy.
Thank you, Margie. Yeah, one quick question. What capital assumptions are you using for the pump storage hydro options?
In terms of the resource itself, or
Yes.
we have that information. I don't have it on the top of my head, but it's posted out on Venue, all of the resource costs we're assuming in the IRP.
Okay.
And we have covered that in previous workshops. I can try to have someone point you to that.
That'd be helpful. And then do all the capital assumptions get adjusted for federal subsidies?
Are you thinking like ITC, PTC, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Where applicable, yes.
Yeah,
Great.
so if resource technology is available, if tax credits are available, that is factored into the capital cost. And the overall revenue.
Yeah, if somebody could point me to that date, I'd appreciate it, but thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Anna, I see you have your hand up. You want to pose a question before we have PNM continue on their presentation. Please go ahead, Anna Summer.
Thank you, Margie. Yeah, I just have one question. I'm gonna have to drop off because I'm on Eastern time, and my kids are demanding dinner. But I'm sort of catching up here after being out for a couple of weeks, and my understanding is that you've now made your nodal data set available for review by those who have signed the confidentiality agreement, but I don't see it posted on the Venue site. Can you clarify what our expectations should be around that?
Yeah, the nodal database is not out on the Venue site. We put all of the other information that's out there. And at this at this time, we're not planning to make a nodal database available. If there's
Oh, okay.
specific, yeah.
Okay, I'll follow up with Kara then. Thanks, Tom.
Great.
I have a question.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Kara
Um,
Lynch.
hi, Kara. Yeah, one question and then let's go on with the presentation.
Okay, it was stated that nodal data would be made available, so CCAE will be making that formal request. Is there a procedure we want to develop to get that data informally, or um, do we have to go through the formal processes to request that from PNM?
I'm not sure where you heard it would be made available because we've never said that.
It was on the last meeting.
No, we never said that.
Okay,
have made
so
all of-
we should file a motion to compel.
Well, I
I
can get back
guess
to you on
I'm
that. 'Cause I have
asking, or
I
do you
have-
want to figure out a way to make some of that data available?
we may be able to make some of the data available, but I've got a discussion on that coming up here, and we can get back to you on that, Karen.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. Tom, would you like to continue, please?
Yeah, so we had talked about trying to look at 4 transmission sensitivity. These are kind of things that were looked at in PNM's 20-year plan. Some of them are enabled by some transmission projects being developed by independent transmission developers, one of which is the SunZia project. That transmission line is in service, and it runs from the wind areas in eastern New Mexico radially into Arizona. So that kind of looked at what happens if we were able to connect that project, which is effectively located in the Cal ISO, with a tie to PNM. Our Rio Sol project's very similar. It actually was originally part of the SunZia project, and it's split out as something separate. Then we looked at what would happen if you do a tie at Blackwater, and then also the project I already mentioned, considered for pump storage and nuclear between Four Corners and Albuquerque. So I'm going over these quickly. We don't know that the zonal results are kind of, because there's really not a way to capture transmission synergies correctly. These really basically just show what happens if you increase interconnection to a market. And then these sensitivities are using some conceptual projects as mentioned. There's several more included in PNM's 20-year plan. PNM has made simplifying assumptions based on available data for modeling purposes, like the line distance, impedance, and cost, using previous studies or requesting specific information. Largely quantifies impacts on the portfolio value of the ones we've already reviewed, looking at the sensitivity. And then the results are maybe somewhat indicative of things you might want to look into more or try developing an arrangement where you might pursue them. But there's a lot more work that would need to be done to get there. So the first project was really one that kind of provides better market access using what's known as the Rio Sol transmission project out there. It's been around for quite some time. It's a project that's being developed by Southwest Power Group. And what would happen if PNM were able to interconnect with that project? So that basically adds some additional capacity to the market, as shown here. The SunZia project is similar, but it really connects to PNM's eastern zone in the zonal model, and then provides capacity to more of the Palo Verde market, Arizona market. Blackwater provides a tie to an SPP market, and then Four Corners is the one you've seen. The results kind of show, this is similar to the way Shane showed results, where he had shown the net present value of revenue requirements for the current trends in policy, future, And then when we look at these different projects, they do show that if you had significant additional capacity, you would probably see an NPV benefit resulting from the project. But again, the magnitude of that benefit coming out of this kind of analysis would be highly questionable. And there's a lot of hurdles. The Real Soul project isn't a given at this point. Certainly a tie to Blackwater would have a lot of hurdles to overcome. The SunZia project being in place might be one that has better alternatives of actually being interconnected with PNM in the future. And then in this particular case, the Four Corners project didn't really provide a value. So, and the reason for that is because in order to do so, it really needs additional market capacity between PNM system and the rest of the West. Without that, it doesn't provide a lot of additional market access. And you see that in the results where the project cost is actually higher than the analysis showed. And then we did the same thing on the HEG, the high economic growth scenario. And again, you basically see very similar results to the CTP in that case. But again, these results are just very high level. The magnitudes would require a lot more work to determine what's needed. They do kind of support that increasing capacity between PNM and markets provides potentially some better optimization of the resource portfolios. They may require expansion beyond PNM system to actually fully utilize the transmission addition. And other ideas can be reviewed in PNM's 20-year output look, which is shown in the link there. Then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to George to go quickly through some of the nodal model results.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me well. If you can't, let me know. In the zonal model, we have a power flow model in there, and when we have candidate expansion projects out of a capacity optimization model, we have to go in there and model them to the transmission system to get the flow and have the flow being transposed or put on the transmission system to show congestion and other items that we're looking at on the nodal model. So this table here represents the coming out of the CTP, HEG, and LHG futures, where resources, specific types of resources, were mapped. As an example, the TZN solar generic, which is a northern New Mexico solar generic resource type prototype coming out of the capacity expansion model, I have it mapped to several different locations. And that was kind of a choice because looking at the capacity expansion and looking what it's building and the sizes, didn't want to try to overload that particular resource at any one particular location. And so we just wanted to be kind of transparent that that's what was being used in this analysis. Go ahead, next one, Tom. And in New Mexico, for those of you who may not be familiar with the New Mexico transmission system, we have two major WEC rated paths. We have path 48, which is a cut set that it cuts the northern New Mexico transmission system. And in the south, we have path 47 in the southern part of the state. Most of the alternatives that we're talking about here today really impact 48. So that's what I'm going to show here on this brief slide presentation, but just to kind of show you what's there. During the analysis, we look at different contingencies, and we picked these contingencies because we wanted to make sure we hit things that were on the boundary or had a tie to the boundary that could influence how the system could get dispatched for its flow calculation in the nodal analysis. Okay, so this is where the eye chart begins, and if you're not awake, you'll be awake now. What we did in this for this presentation is we kind of narrowed in on 4 items: losses in gigawatt hours, curtailments in gigawatt hours, congestion in congestion dollars, and congestion hours. And this is relative to the congestion. When I say congestion here, I'm talking about its impact on Path 48. And we picked those 4 coming into this analysis because it kind of models FERC Order 1920. I don't know if any of you know FERC Order 1920. I won't go into it here, but it's something that is becoming something that the transmission providers will start doing and have to comply with. And so the orange bars in all these are the CTP, and then you have HEG and LEG. LEG is in green. And you can see how the losses and their curtailments, the curtailments here are about, in the worst case, in the LEG scenario, are about 12 gigawatt hours, which, and that's in 2039. In 2029, it's only about 4, and in the CTP, it's 0. So what we're seeing is, as we go out in time, with what we're seeing currently, is we're not seeing a lot of curtailments, for instance. Last year we saw quite a bit of curtailments, but last year we didn't have the kind of resources that we're planning to have in 2029 that we're planning currently through our IRP process. So this meets our expectations going forward. I'm just surprised it's 0. That's kind of an astonishing number. I thought there would be some little bit there, but I'm not seeing any in the model. Losses, you can see that as we go up in time, they increase a little bit with load. That kind of makes sense. And as you have higher build out of resources, I can see how the congestion on the HEG is going to go up, similarly with the CTP, and the LEG is a lot more muted because that forecast is significantly lower. Congestion hours kind of follow that similar trend as well. Go to the next one, Tom. So we throw in putting in a Rio Sol, and what I did here, when you get these slides and go back and forth on the slide deck here, is you'll notice that I kept 2029 and all these last 5 slides all the same. 2029 does not have any transmission improvement in it. The transmission improvement for this analysis is only in 2034 and 2039. So you'll see when we go through these slides that you will not see any change in 2029. I tried to keep that the same as a metric so that it kept the scale the same, so I wasn't switching scales as we went through this, but it also kind of gave you a reference looking at the first one going to the other slide. So here's Rio Sol. It definitely kind of mutes the curtailment needs in the out years. Congestion is coming down in congestion hours, and you would certainly hope so if you're adding a transmission improvement. So go ahead and go to the next one, Tom. Here's Sunzia. In this alternative, it did all right. I have, we'll have to, this is kind of, like we said, preliminary. I've got some congestion in that 2034, 2039 case for the LEG. That's kind of counterintuitive, and so that's going to require me to do a little digging. That doesn't quite make sense to me, so I'm going to have to do some digestion of that. Losses probably didn't really have a high impact on losses or congestion, so I've got some investigation on this particular scenario. Go to the next one, Tom. We got a delay. We're waiting on it. Technology is wonderful. Is it me, or is it hasn't moved, right?
Hasn't moved.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, Blackwater. On that sensitivity, you still have some curtailment in that same vein on this one too. So I'll have to look at that. But it definitely mutes on losses. It pulls the losses down a little bit. Congestion and the HEG is still high, so that tells me there's still potentially some internal congestion getting to that transmission alternative. let's go to the next, go ahead and go to the next one, Tom. Okay, here's Four Corners. Four Corners really did, you know, it really muted those out years quite considerably. And curtailments came down a little bit, but the congestion dollars and the congestion got really addressed quite well with this transmission alternative. And I don't think I have anything beyond this, Tom. Summary. Thank you. So takeaways, curtailment of renewables is the focus of our nodal modeling. Significant curtailment results were not identified. Again, the curtailments were relatively in size and magnitude quite a bit smaller than, you know, we were expecting. Remote resources should consider both potential costs and schedule for transmission enhancements. That's why we're in our assumptions. Most 3 out of the 4 projects have at least 10-year lead times on them. I think the Rio Sol had a 2028 or 2029, maybe, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it was a nearer term project just because we thought it was a little further along. And then transmission adders may not be warranted for all technologies in the same location. Certainly you saw that I mapped a lot of those, you know, in the nodal analysis, mapped a lot of those solar projects to multiple buses in the Albuquerque area or in central New Mexico, north central New Mexico, because there's a lot of, you know, interconnection requests in our transmission queue for those types of resources. Some curtailment may be more economic solution over transmission. In addition to provide the system, it can be redispatched to meet reliability requirements. So I think that kind of speaks for itself. Candidate portfolios would be adjusted based on curtailment impacts. So while we didn't see a lot of curtailments, that's something that's always in the back of our mind. Do you have anything, Tom?
No, I think that's it. Just for perspective on the slide where we're saying curtailments aren't significant, so we're seeing curtailments in the worst case here in the LEG case in 2039 at 12 gigawatt hours. We know our actual system curtailments of renewables in 2025 was around 350 gigawatt hours. So this has essentially come down to almost nothing compared to what we saw. 350 gigawatt hours represents roughly about 3 to 4% of the total renewable energy that could be produced. And with future resource plans, we expect that number to continue dropping.
Margie, I think we turn it over to you for questions.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Barbara Chatterjee. Kelly Gould has her hand up, and then I want to go back to Remy Franklin from Interwest in case he's got questions based on the previous questions that he's submitted. So maybe, Tom, you can go back to slide 20 for Barbara's question. Barbara, would you like to come off mute to state your question about 3 projects you're wondering how they fit in, or would you rather I do that?
You can go ahead. It's written pretty well.
Yeah, Barbara's asking about some specific large solar and battery energy storage projects, particularly Atrisco, Globe Malo, and Rancho Viejo. And her question is, how do these impact the IRP planning for PNM and the need for transmission? So Atrisco, Globe Malo, and Rancho Viejo, are they included in this suite?
Atrisco is a resource that's been approved and is in service today. So that one is included as an existing resource.
Great.
The other 2 have never been selected, so we don't put actual specific projects into the IRP because it's really looking at different technologies. So those other 2 would not be specifically included.
Okay, thank you. Good question, Barbara. Kelly Gould, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Kelly Gould with Anna Maria. So I have some clarifying questions. And yeah, so first of all, is the currently filed transmission case for Rio Puerco, is that included? Like,
Yes,
how is that?
the database includes the projects that are in the CCN filing PNM made, Rio Puerco to Parrito to Prosperity.
So it's included in the base case?
Correct. That's
Okay,
correct.
as though it was all approved. Is that true?
No,
Like the case is pending, but like
Pending. It's
basically
pending,
what
but
PNM has asked, as though
yeah, it's pending, Kelly, it's pending, but we assumed it to be in
Yeah.
service for this analysis, yes.
Okay. And is there any excess when San Juan coal generating station was abandoned, I remember there was a lot of excess capacity on the transmission line in that direction. Has that capacity been used?
yes, a portion of it has, but there's still potentially some capacity that could still be used between Four Corners and Albuquerque. And that's partly why we're not seeing, when we locate stuff up there in the nodal analysis, really isn't showing any significant congestion or curtailment for that location right now.
So then why would
So-
you put an adder on projects located in that direction?
It'll depend upon the magnitude. So like I said, I don't think we will put a adder in there for things like pump storage, but when we're adding 700 to 1,000 megawatts of nuclear, that's going to require transmission to go with it. Because we certainly don't have that much capacity left.
Yeah, what do you think you have, like 200?
Yeah, probably in that range. 200 to 300
Okay.
could probably fit up there without additional transmission capacity. Now we have to be careful there because there is third parties that are also building resources in New Mexico. And we may, if they put in transmission service requests, you can lose capacity that exists today.
Right, if they lock it up.
We can't reserve capacity for a use that's not defined yet.
Okay. And then all of those runs that were modeled for the additional capacity, they were just adding one line at a time, right? They weren't cumulative. It was just looking at, like, if we add this one line, what it would look like. If we add this other line, what it would look like. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And then I guess I didn't realize this in our Wednesday meeting, but I heard you say today that the model in the CTP case did not choose any wind. Was that surprising for PNM? And I'm seeing that it chose a lot of battery. So I'm just curious, like, from PNM's like operational perspective, how these model outcomes are, I guess I could be totally wrong. I'm not in PNM's, working groups or anything, but I was under the impression that, PNM maybe needed the wind for the different kind of, like the different load pro. PNM didn't want more solar and batteries, and it seems like that's not what the model is choosing. So I'm just wondering how surprising that is for PNM, and if that actually matches PNM's perspectives on what is best for the system.
Yeah, so the starting point for the IRP has quite a bit of wind in there already. The costs going forward tended to favor the solar more, which is probably the lowest cost energy resource we're modeling in the IRP right now. The trade-offs become when you need more and more battery. And some of the results tend to imply that if you can put in the really dispatchable resources are the ones that provide a lot of baseload energy, like the nuclear, it tends to select solar more. If you're stuck more with short duration storage or stuck more with some of the intermediate range storage versus short duration storage, you tend to see wind get selected more because it pairs better with the longer duration storage. Some of
I
that is
see. How
some of
much?
that we're kind of guessing out, but the cost of the resources seems to be consistent with expectations that solar is going to get picked, especially when just
Okay.
energy is needed.
Okay. How
So,
much wind is
Kelly,
modeled?
we're gonna move on to our transmission specific questions. I think PNM presented the choice of resources in the last workshop. Let's get to Remy's question. If we have time, we'll come back to your remaining questions, Kelly. Thanks. Go ahead, Remy.
Sure, thanks so much. Couple of questions, maybe just starting with the nodal since we're on that. Can you talk a little more about how the results you just shared will be sort of reincorporated in the portfolio analysis? I'm just trying to understand sort of so for the sensitivities that you just presented the results for, are you essentially going to, look at the cost of those projects gets just sort of folded into the present value revenue requirement and then any cost reductions provided by the sort of congestion relief? Is that really it, or is there more sort of to understand there?
No, we're really using the nodal only to sanity check whether resources seem to fit on the system compatibly with others. So the only results that we're really going to influence anything with is if we see curtailments of significant amount cropping up. And as we said, we're not seeing that at this point with these
I see.
runs.
Okay.
The other things are interesting, but those congestion cost type values, you could try to put a cost on losses too if you wanted. And the difference is that those are heavily dependent upon the market price forecast and the gas forecast you're using. And they're pretty volatile numbers.
Yeah.
We're not comfortable using that yet.
Got it. Okay, this is clarifying for me. So I'm just going to repeat it back to make sure I understand accurately. Then it also answers my question about why you're using WEC paths. So the concern is if the sort of WEC paths were overloaded to an extent that would cause problems, and that's the main purpose of the nodal analysis around these sensitivities.
That's correct. And that's been the historic issue we've seen is that when we have high wind conditions in New Mexico, there's too much renewable to export and serve the load at the same time. So you end up in some curtailments. We're trying to make sure we understand that we're not aggravating that situation further, or at least can put curtailments in the proper perspective of what would the cost be to reduce that. And it's
Okay.
pretty significant transmission you would need to actually, you'd have to have quite a bit of curtailment to really justify transmission to reduce that.
Understood. Thank you. And so maybe combining that with the results from the zonal analysis that you shared, do I understand correctly that the zonal analysis of the transmission sensitivities essentially shows that, except for from the four corners, the other three sensitivities, the initial thought is that the cost would be justified by the savings enabled by that additional market access?
Yeah, the zonal results tend to imply that, but again, I say we'd have to do a lot more work to really try to back that up. And that would require some expertise that we don't have. We'd have to work with some consultants who do more regional modeling, and we'd probably have to work with developers to move these actual concepts forward.
Probably want to nail down those costs, Remy, a little bit more than what we have. We kind of got a planning estimate at best. And I think if we were really going to move forward, we'd have to really dot our I's and cross our T's on the costs and routing. And we made some high level, distance measurements and costs and per mile and that kind of stuff. And it was very high level.
Sure.
Yeah, and like I said, the zonal model really does not capture much in terms of the synergy, the transmission, or anything with third parties.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. I think I had sort of incorrectly assumed that the nodal analysis was going to look at like system upgrades. Like you do basically a transmission planning study that would look at system upgrades required to deliver the IRP resource portfolios. Sounds like that's not happening as part of the IRP process. Do I understand that correctly?
Basically, we're saying the results aren't driving us to really change what we've gotten so far. Otherwise, if we were seeing significant curtailments, yeah, we would probably go back and look at what project helps to address those, and then run that back through the zonal.
Okay. Sounds good. I have some other questions, but Margie, I want to, make sure that if others want to jump in, they can.
Yeah, I'm glad that Jacob was reading my mind. Jacob Richardson, I see your hand is up. I know you and Remy had been volunteered to lead some conversation on these transmission models. Would you like to go ahead with your question?
Yes, thank you, Margie. And just to kind of follow up on that conversation Remy was having with Tom, Tom, what would PNM need to see to take that sharper pencil, so to speak, for those transmission projects that, from your initial analysis, is reducing the net present value of revenue requirement? Would you like to see multiple IRP cycles selecting or identifying these transmission projects as a benefit to net present value? Just kind of maybe help us understand your thinking process at PNM for that.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't know that I have too much of an answer. I think we would want to have some understanding of the feasibility of those projects and the challenges that go with them. That in theory would help refine the cost and the schedule, but we don't know if a couple of those are really even feasible because the projects still have some hurdles just in and of themselves. And nobody has tried to develop transmission capacity that connects central New Mexico to SPP. That just has not really been done at anything except a highly conceptual level. So we would want to see something more certain that you could actually build that, and the costs we used were in the right ballpark. That was a pretty expensive alternative we put in there, and it does show that your cost differentials, really what it's showing is cost differentials between SPP and PNM may make enough sense to actually pursue something like that. But we would have to do a lot more analysis and probably get some partners and work with some of the consulting firms who really do that kind of work.
Because as you get to the edge of your own system, the knowledge of, some of how those other entities work and some of their plans, we've tried to follow El Paso's IRP and a lot of those other things by building in those resource plans into those areas in our nodal model, but there's still a high degree of lack of knowledge, especially as you go out in time. The near term is a lot easier to kind of get your hands around, but the longer term kind of gets really hard to forecast with any kind of comfort. And so we feel that some of the people that are doing, some other external entities that are doing this would definitely help out in that arena.
Can I ask one related question, unless you wanted to go, Jacob?
No, go for it, Remy.
Yeah, when you presented the sort of changes in the sensitivities, did I understand correctly that the market access that was modeled for each of those sensitivities is just an energy change? There's no change in assumptions about using markets for capacity?
Correct. So what we did on all the analysis, whether it was in the zonal model or in the nodal model, is we did the capacity expansion plan the way we've done all our capacity expansion plans with no market. So we did the capacity expansion plan. We wanted to make sure anything we were building in that future or that sensitivity where we're doing a capacity expansion, that all the environmental concerns were made, the RPS requirements, the ETA, all that stuff was enforced. And then when we when we came up with a scenario to look at transmission, we added the transmission, added the market access, but we weren't rerunning the capacity optimization. We were just saying, what impact, now that we're here with XYZ capacity expansion, what impact does the market or have access or does transmission have on that solution? We weren't trying to re-optimize with adding, we weren't optimizing to the market.
Yeah. Understood. I guess this gets at sort of my question related to stakeholder model runs, which I know is really timely, and I know we're also out of time, but so I can follow up via email if that's necessary. But I guess what we've seen in a few limited cases in the West is IRPs that are considering transmission as a capacity resource. So in addition to providing that market access, which is already, it sounds like, maybe showing sort of directional benefits just from production cost savings to PNM system, like those transmission investments are. We've seen some other IRPs that are attempting to look at if, you know, the additional transmission can actually provide capacity maybe during certain seasons or times of the year. For example, like I would be interested to see like what does access to SPP system look like? Like could that be considered, you know, a capacity resource during parts of the year? Sounds like that's probably out of scope for the RP, but I'm wondering if PNM sees any possibility to do additional model runs that might get at that possibility or sort of start to answer that question.
I don't, yeah, I think it's totally out of scope for the IRP, but I think it's a good question. We thought about it, and I do know that that it's something that could be looked at and studied, trying to figure out what would the capacity value of a tie with SPP be. We would have to figure out how to find an entity who could run a study and scope that. I will say that the capacity of the Western markets, we do indirectly include that because of the way Encompass itself really doesn't, we don't have a database there that really is good at that. But when we come up, Encompass is, you know, is driven by basically, it builds its capacity expansion around an input reserve margin. But the reserve margin is something that's determined from the reliability analysis, which does factor in connections to neighboring systems. So the SERV-M model factors those in, and we basically use those reliability analysis to get to the reliability criteria of 0.1 LOLE, and out of that exercise, they recommend what reserve margin we need to hit that reliability. And that value will change. That reserve margin value will change depending upon the size of interconnection included in the SERV-M model.
What would it take, Tom, to, yeah, sorry, I know we're out of time, Margie, sorry.
Yeah, well, let me ask if George and Tom, if you have another 15 minutes for people who are working on their model run requests to answer a few more questions before I can close. Those who are not putting in requests, you're welcome to stay on or go, but I want to give people Tom and Dwayne, and George, are you available for another 10 to 15 minutes?
Sure.
I am.
Okay, let me just close so people know what's happening next, and then we'll come back to any additional questions. I know Remy and Jacob are actively working on modeling run requests, so we want to make sure we can answer their questions. Let me just describe for everyone, if you're listening in, we'll post a recording and the slide deck that Tom and George have described today. Please see the summary that we sent out this morning from workshop number 5. That's got specific instructions regarding the stakeholder modeling run requests, asking you to turn those in regardless of how well developed they are by this Friday, April 24th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. If you need an extension of time, there are instructions for you to request an extension through May 6th for modeling run requests. So please see that correspondence from Deb Shields as of this morning. And PNM will be working hard to help work with stakeholders to refine and parameterize those requests, and hopefully as many requests that can be looked at and adopted and run by May 13th, our next workshop. They're going to do their darndest to address those, but please recognize not all requests may be feasible and not all requests may be doable by May 13th. But just want to let people know what the next steps are. Please see your email for those specific instructions. And so that hopefully you see that here in the slide deck that's got those details, and I'll leave that up while go back to Remy and Jacob first for any questions they have, and then others who are working on contemplating model requested runs. So Other questions, Remy and Jacob or others about this?
Sure, maybe I'll just ask the question I was getting to, and thanks for making additional time, y'all. I guess Interwatch doesn't want to submit, useless model run requests, and we don't really have a great idea for how to get at these things, I'm sure, any more than you do. But just wondering, based on what you just shared, Tom, if I assume the sort of RA analysis has already been done, but I'm wondering what it would take to do that analysis, assuming some of these additional transmission lines were in service, and then actually look at what that does to the PRM. Perhaps that's not necessary, and this is like part of an additional sort of transmission study process that y'all have indicated, could follow to get at more of these details. But it just seems to me like just looking at production cost savings of some of these additional transmission lines is probably missing out on some of the potential benefits they could provide. And so if this is the way to get at potential capacity savings of additional regional connectivity, then maybe there's a place for that in the IRP.
Yeah, we would have to run that past the consultant we work with Power Gem and see what their thoughts are on that. The question is whether you can really put in valid assumptions. They can always model an interconnection with capacity to another region, but does it really capture the right capacity value? So we can run that by them and see what they say. I wouldn't necessarily shy away from a stakeholder request around that. I just don't know if we could really accommodate it at this point.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I'll let others go if they have questions, or I can keep going otherwise.
Jacob, anything else from you? Or Anna Linden, are you on? Did you have anything?
I am on, but
in
Jacob has
transmission?
asked my questions.
Okay, excellent. All right. So Remy, Kelly's got your hand up, and then we'll go back to Remy. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just missing this in the conversation with Remy, but I'm curious. So, okay, let me see how I can phrase this. In PNM's CTP, do they have the capacity of the transmission to accommodate the CTP and the HEG, or would they need new transmission anyway? Because it was my understanding that PNM doesn't have a lot of transmission capacity. So I guess I'm just a little confused about how transmission is being modeled in general. And if there's ever like a time when there's sufficient resources where the model chooses extra capacity, or if that's not at all what's happening.
So we're basically saying in the CTP and even the HEG that the way resources are being located isn't really driving transmission for the purpose of delivering the resource. We do have those assumed CCN projects in there, but those are just based on the loads we're modeling. Those things are driven. You would need something just to serve the load regardless of the resource location. So those are included in there. They probably benefit the resources to a certain degree. But outside of that, we're not really seeing the resources that are studied in the CTP and HEG are driving transmission needs.
I don't understand what you said. Those are being included. What did you mean by that? Those are being included regardless. What do you mean by those?
We've assumed those are based assumptions in things like the Rio Puerto Pajarito that you had brought up earlier.
So the things that have already been requested, but nothing new beyond that?
Correct.
And so it's what I hear you saying is that based on the CTP and the HEG, PNM thinks that they could accommodate that kind of load growth without additional transmission.
That's correct.
Beyond what we've already assumed in the base,
which is just what has been filed in Puerto. Is there any others assumed? Okay. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Helen. I think that goes to Remy. Your final question. In addition to the Rio Puerto Pajarito Prosperity CCN, Are there other planned transmission projects that are assumed in service in the IRP model?
The biggest one is assumed in there goes along with the 29 to 32 resource filing, which does include a transmission line to accommodate wind that was identified in that portfolio. But those are really the big ones that are in the base case assumptions. And
That hasn't been filed yet, correct?
that's correct. It's been announced, and we have shared some high-level information with stakeholders on it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you for the PNM team putting this additional session together. Transmission is an important topic. We will look forward to any ideas you have about transmission related model run requests to be turned in by Friday. If you need extension, you are able to request that up until May. Well, put the request for extension in also by April 24th. For revised or updated run requests by May the 6th. That'll be the length of the extension will be through May 6th. And then PNM will have to be crunching numbers. So thank you again. The idea, Remy and Jacob, the two of you, I think perhaps leading the conversation on model run requests in transmission, please reach out to irp@pnm.com if you need assistance with your model run request. And George and Tom, I'm sure will have the right team in place to help walk you through that conversation and determine if a request is warranted or how to best shape it that would give new insight both for the utility and for stakeholders. So with that, Tom, Dwayne, is there anything you would like to say in conclusion before we close this workshop office hour?
No, thank you all for your participation, and I hope that helps to kind of set the framework of where we're at. We would expect that we will, to the extent that other technologies, geothermal in particular, we expect some stakeholder requests. There will probably have to be some transmission assumptions with those. We're reviewing some of the resource locations that were considered there, but those are all things that we would then share with as we go over stakeholder scenario results.
Great, thank you, and thanks everyone for your participation. We will see you next on May 13th via WebEx, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at our next workshop. And thank you for your participation in the stakeholder process. So with that, we'll say goodbye and see you in May.
Thank you.
Right. Take care.
Thank you.